I was 5 months pregnant, hiding in a tiny apartment in Washington Heights, and I had not told a single person the truth. Not my friends, not my family, and definitely not the father. Because the father of my baby was Adrian Caruso, the head of the most feared crime family on the entire East Coast. I found out who he really was the morning after we spent the night together. I saw the articles, the federal investigations, the photos of him leaving courtrooms surrounded by lawyers who defend killers. I ran. I erased every trace of myself and swore I would raise this child completely alone. But on the worst night of my life, sobbing on the bathroom floor of an office building I cleaned at night, the door opened, and the man standing there changed everything. He was not Adrian, but he worked for him. And that meant my secret was already gone. This is a story about a woman who had to choose between the safety of hiding and the terrifying risk of being truly known. It will show you why the people we run from the hardest are sometimes the ones we need the most. Stay until the very end, because the ending will remind you that love does not wait for the perfect time. It finds you when you have nothing left. If stories like this touch your heart, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss one. It began with a call from my weekend catering job. They had a last-minute event at the Celestial, a hotel so lavish, one night costs more than I earned in 3 months. I was bone tired, but the pay was triple the usual rate, and my rent was going up. I put on the uniform, a simple black dress and white apron, and joined 20 other servers who looked as worn out as I felt. The ballroom was an obscene display of wealth. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars over polished marble floors. The guests wore fortunes in fabric and jewels. I offered champagne and appetizers, becoming invisible the way service staff always do. Then I felt it, the distinct sensation of being watched. Across the room I saw him. He was impossibly tall, standing in a charcoal suit that was worth more than my car. His dark hair was perfectly styled. Even from a distance, I could see the sharp line of his jaw and the intensity in his eyes. People near him seemed to keep a careful distance, respecting an unseen boundary of power. His name was Adrian Caruso, a name I would soon learn to fear. When our eyes met, he did not look away. He offered no polite dismissal. Instead, he simply lifted his glass, a slight smile touching his lips that said more than words. My heart began to pound for reasons that had nothing to do with work. I tried to ignore him, to remember I was there to serve drinks, not to engage with men who radiated danger. But later, he found me in an empty service hall. He moved silently, and I did not notice him until he spoke. His voice was low, laced with an Italian accent that spoke of wealth and expensive schools. We spoke for what was likely only 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. We discussed art, wealth, and my dream of owning a business. He listened with an intensity that made me feel like the only person in the world. When his fingers brushed against my hand, a shock went through me. I should have left. I saw the warning signs, the way other guests feared him, the way 3 men in dark suits watched him from afar. But I was 23 and so tired of being unseen. When he invited me to the rooftop garden after my shift, I said yes. The rooftop was ours alone. The city glittered below us like a sea of fallen stars. He kissed me against the glass barrier as the wind whipped around us, and I abandoned all reason. We went to his suite, and the night that followed felt like something from a novel. He was passionate and focused in a way I had never known. For a few hours, I let myself believe in fairy tales, but morning always brings the truth. While he was still asleep, I made the mistake of searching his name online. What I discovered turned my blood to ice. There were articles about organized crime, investigations into racketeering, photos of him leaving courtrooms with lawyers who kept dangerous men free. Adrian Caruso was not just rich. He was the head of one of the most feared crime families on the East Coast. My hands trembled as I dressed in the silent room. I left without a word. I threw away the card he had left with his private number and deleted the hotel from my phone, trying to convince myself it was a single mistake I would never make again. I told myself a man like Adrian Caruso would forget a girl like me. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I took a pregnancy test in a drugstore bathroom. When 2 lines appeared, I sat there for 20 minutes, struggling to breathe. A second test, and then a third, delivered the same result. At a clinic in Brooklyn, a doctor confirmed I was 6 weeks pregnant. I faced a choice that would change my life forever. I considered ending the pregnancy. I made appointments and canceled them. But something deep inside me, something beyond logic, stopped me every time. It was not religion or morals. It was a stubborn, terrifying hope that I could do this alone. I knew what it felt like to grow up without a father, and I could not inflict that on my child. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I could not tell Adrian. He was a mob boss who solved problems with violence. How would he react? He might think I had trapped him. He might see the baby as a liability, a weakness his enemies could use, or he could make us both disappear. I was not brave enough to find out. So I chose to hide. I found a sublet in Washington Heights and paid 3 months in cash. I got a new phone number and erased my social media profiles. I told anyone who asked that I was handling private family matters. At work, I wore loose clothes and lied about a back injury to explain why I could no longer lift heavy things. When morning sickness started, I blamed it on food poisoning. But my body was changing in ways I could no longer conceal. My time was running out. My secret forced my world to shrink. I turned down every invitation and stayed away from company gatherings. My coworkers just thought I was antisocial. In reality, I was building a wall of lies that grew taller and more exhausting each day. By the 5th month, hiding the truth was a harder job than my actual job. My morning ritual was a careful inspection in the mirror. I would stand sideways, checking the change, planning a new disguise of loose sweaters and high-waisted pants. My closet filled with oversized blazers from secondhand shops and flowing tops I wore in layers. I used scarves to draw attention away from my growing stomach. My coworkers must have thought I had a strange new obsession with fashion, or maybe that I was gaining a lot of weight. They were too polite to say anything. The physical strain was constant. My secretary job meant sitting for 8 hours straight. I created a whole system for survival. I angled my chair to hide my profile. I waited for empty hallways to use the restroom. I ate at my desk while others laughed in the break room. The night cleaning shift was worse. Every motion of bending or lifting felt like a risk. I finally had to quit my catering job after almost collapsing. I invented a family emergency to explain my absence. The anxiety about money was a weight that kept me awake. Prenatal care was expensive, even at a low-cost clinic in the Bronx. There were vitamins, new clothes, and the deposit for a new apartment. I bought a disposable phone just in case. The costs grew faster than my paychecks. I found freelance transcription work to do at night. My fingers would ache, and my eyes would burn as I typed. I listened to strangers talk about legal cases and medical problems to forget my own. I sold my laptop, my jewelry, and even my old college textbooks. I stopped attending my classes, telling myself I would go back after the baby was born. It was a lie to make the present feel less hopeless. But the loneliness was the worst part. It was harder than the lack of money or the physical pain. I had never been a social butterfly, but I had friends. I had people. I pushed them all away to protect my secret. I ignored texts and made excuses to avoid meeting anyone. My best friend Sarah called me 17 times in 1 week. She finally texted that she was worried and begged me to let her know I was alive. I sent a short reply about a family problem and then blocked her number. I knew if I heard her voice, the truth would spill out. My only real human connection was with my obstetrician. Dr. Patricia Chen was a serious woman in her 50s. Her practice helped patients who needed privacy. At my first visit, she asked about the father and my support system. I gave vague answers and told obvious lies. She just made notes in my chart and talked about nutrition. Every month, I returned. I would listen to the tiny heartbeat that always made me cry. I would look at the ultrasound pictures that I kept in a locked box. She would give me the same advice about rest that I could never seem to follow. The baby started to feel real slowly, and then all at once. For months, it was just a problem I had to manage. But in my 4th month, I felt a tiny flutter. I thought I had imagined it. A week later, a clear kick made me gasp during a meeting. After that, the baby was always with me. This small person had opinions on my food, my sleep, and my posture. I began to speak to them inside my head during the long, sleepless nights. I told them about my day. I told them about the father they would never meet. I wondered if that made me selfish, or protective, or just terrified. I tried not to think about Adrian, but I always did. I would see a man on the train with a similar frame, and my heart would pound. I had dreams about him. Sometimes they were good dreams about his gentle touch, but mostly they were nightmares where he found out the truth and his face became cold and cruel. I searched his name online constantly. I read about his business, his legal battles, and his family. I saw photos of him at charity events with stunning women. I saw him leaving restaurants with men who looked like they could hurt you. I saw him walking out of court with that same intense look I remembered. One story called him ruthless. It said he commanded loyalty with a mix of fear and true protection for his people. Another described a violent fight with a rival group that left 3 men dead. Adrian walked free. There was not enough evidence. This was not the man who had listened to my dreams for hours. The man who had touched me so carefully was not this person. I could not make the two versions of him fit together in my head. Which one was real? And what was wrong with me that I still missed him? As the months passed, my fear grew stronger. I felt like I was being watched. I was sure one of his men would be waiting for me around the next corner. I changed my route home every day. I was always looking over my shoulder. I avoided any place I had mentioned to him. A black vehicle with dark windows was parked on my street for 3 days. I almost had a panic attack. Then I learned it was just my neighbor's boyfriend. Every knock at the door made my heart race. The constant lying wore me down. I had always been an honest person. Now, my entire life was a lie. I had to keep all the stories straight. I lied to my landlord about breaking my lease. I lied to my boss about my mini doctor visit. I lied to the last few people in my life to explain my distance. Most of all, I lied to myself that I was doing the right thing. The worst moments were late at night, alone with my thoughts. The baby would move inside me, and the weight of my future would crush me. Lying in my small apartment, I wondered what would happen when the baby came. How could I pay for childcare? How could I work with a newborn alone? What would I say when my child asked about their father? Would I invent a story about a man who never existed? Or would I tell a version of the truth that would only create more questions? I looked into every option. I researched adoption and foster care. I applied for government help, for housing, for anything. I even checked if I could legally give up the baby without naming the father. The thought made me sick with guilt. But nothing felt like the right solution. So I just kept going, one day at a time. I told myself I would find an answer when I had to. My body was changing in ways that were both amazing and frightening. The baby was so active now, especially at night. It felt like they were doing gymnastics inside me. I had gained weight. My face was rounder. My ankles were swollen after every single shift. My back was in constant pain. My hips felt like they were splitting with every step. I had developed a waddle that I tried so hard to hide. The physical misery was endless, but part of me felt I deserved it as payment for my choices. The real collapse happened on a Tuesday in late October, 5 months into my pregnancy. It started like any other evening. I finished my shift at the law firm, bought a cheap sandwich for dinner, and went to my cleaning job. I had worked in that corporate building for almost a year. I was in charge of 4 floors, which meant 4 hours of emptying garbage, running a vacuum, and cleaning bathrooms for executives who lived in a different world. That night, I felt wrong from the moment I started. The baby had been moving all day, pressing into my ribs and making it hard to breathe. A headache had started on my commute, and it was only getting worse, but I could not afford to miss a single shift. I was already falling behind on saving money for when I could no longer work. I began on the 15th floor, moving through the empty offices, trying to ignore my aching back. Around 8:30, my landlord called. I almost let it ring because I knew it would be bad news. But I answered anyway. His voice was soft, but his words were hard. The building was sold. The new owners were renovating. Everyone had to be out by the end of the month. He said he understood it was difficult. He truly did. But it was out of his hands. He could give me back my security deposit, but I had to find a new place to live immediately. The entire conversation took maybe 5 minutes. By the time it was over, my hands were shaking too much to hold the phone. I just stood there in the silent hallway, staring at the floor, trying to understand what this meant. I had saved enough money for 1 more month of rent, maybe 2 if I ate less. But finding an affordable apartment in New York City was a fantasy. Finding one for a visibly pregnant single woman with no good references was impossible. I thought about the baby, and what would happen if we were homeless. I wondered if this was the universe telling me I had made a terrible mistake. The panic felt like a physical blow. It squeezed my chest and made my vision swim. I stumbled to the nearest bathroom and collapsed against the wall, my legs giving out. And then, for the first time since I found out I was pregnant, I broke completely. The tears were huge, ragged sobs that I could not stop. The kind of crying that shakes your whole body and leaves your throat raw. I wrapped my arms around my belly, feeling the baby move inside me. I cried for everything I had already lost, and everything I was terrified of losing. I do not know how long I sat on that cold tile floor, huddled over in an empty bathroom where I was supposed to be working. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been 30. Then I heard footsteps in the hall. They were heavy and sure, and they stopped right outside the bathroom door. I tried to stop crying, to pull myself together, but I could not. The handle turned even though the door was locked. The entire frame shook as someone kicked it open with a single, powerful blow. I looked up, my face wet with tears, and I saw him. Adrian Caruso stood in that doorway. He was a vision from my worst nightmares. He wore a 3-piece navy suit that cost more than I earned in 6 months. His dark hair was styled perfectly. A diamond watch on his wrist caught the light. We just stared at each other. I watched his expression change from worried to shocked to something I did not recognize, as his eyes moved from my tear-streaked face down to my belly. It was too big to hide anymore. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, with an emotion I had never heard from him. Natalie. It was just my name, but the way he said it made me sob even harder. He took a step toward me, and I pressed myself back into the wall. He stopped as if I had hit him. How long? He asked. He was fighting to keep his voice steady. How long have you been pregnant? I could not answer him. I could not make words past the crying. He crouched down slowly, carefully, keeping a space between us as if I were a frightened animal. Up close, I saw things I had forgotten. The little scar above his left eyebrow, the exact dark shade of his eyes, the way a muscle in his jaw flexed when he was trying to control his anger. Who is the father, Natalie? His voice had become very quiet and very dangerous. Tell me now, who is the father? The question filled the small room. I knew I had only seconds to make a choice that would change my life. I could lie, I could invent a boyfriend or a random man who meant nothing to him. But looking into his eyes, seeing him barely holding himself together, I could not do it. The truth came out as a whisper. You are. I watched my words hit him like a physical strike. He rocked back. His hand flew to his mouth, and his eyes grew wide with shock and rage and pain all mixed together. You are telling me, he said slowly, his accent getting thicker, just as it had that night, that you have been carrying my child for, he pointed at my belly, months. And you did not think I deserved to know. I was scared, I managed to say. I did not know what you would do. I could not finish. I could not say all the awful things I had imagined. His face hardened. When he spoke again, his voice was cold. What did you think I would do, Natalie? He stood up quickly and began pacing the small bathroom like a trapped animal. Did you think I would hurt you, force you to get rid of it, make you disappear? Each question was sharper than the one before. I could hear real pain under his anger. I do not know you, I said. We spent one night together. I only knew what I read about you online. And nothing I read suggested you would be happy about a baby with someone you did not know. If this story already has you holding your breath, take a second to hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe and ring the bell so you do not miss what happens next, because what is coming will change everything. He turned to face me so quickly that I flinched. One night, he repeated. You think that was just one night for me? Do you think I have not spent the last 6 months trying to find you, wondering what I did to make you run away from me, like I was a monster? He ran a hand through his perfect hair, messing it up. I had people looking for you, Natalie. I was trying to be careful because I did not want to scare you. But I looked. Do you know how hard you have to try to hide from someone with my resources? This new information did not fit with anything I believed. You looked for me. My voice was small. Of course I looked for you, he said. Suddenly all the anger seemed to leave him. He looked almost broken. He slid down the wall across from me and put his head in his hands. That night meant something to me. You meant something to me. And then you disappeared. He stopped and looked up. His eyes were filled with pain. I thought I had imagined it all, that I was just another rich man who told himself a beautiful woman wanted him for something other than his money. His confession made my own heart ache. It was not like that, I said quietly. That night was real. All of it was real. That is why I ran. It scared me how much I felt for you, and how quickly it happened. And then I found out who you really were, and I just panicked. He was quiet for a long time, watching my face. So instead of talking to me, you decided to hide my child from me and struggle all alone, crying on bathroom floors. His eyes looked over my cheap clothes and my exhausted face. I could see him finally understanding how hard everything had been. How have you been paying for medical care? I have been managing, I said. trying to hold on to my last bit of pride. I have two jobs. I found a clinic. I have been. You have been barely surviving. He cut me off, his voice hard again. Do not lie to me, Natalie. Not now. He stood up, and he was suddenly towering over me. This tall, powerful man who he could end my entire life with one phone call. And he knew it. You are coming with me. His voice left no room for argument. What? I tried to scramble up from the tiles, but my limbs refused to obey. No, you cannot just... This is not a choice. He bent down and lifted me effortlessly, my pregnant belly and all. I felt weightless in his arms. You are exhausted, you are distraught, and you are carrying my baby. We are going to a safe place. We will talk there, not on the floor of a bathroom in a building where you should never have been working. Let me go, I said, but the words had no strength. The truth was, I was too tired to fight. Being held by someone who seemed to care, even if he was furious, felt dangerously good. Adrienne carried me from that bathroom as if I were fragile, as if I were precious. His arms were a steel cage around me, ignoring my weak protests that I could walk on my own. The elevator doors closed, trapping me with our reflection in the mirrored walls. There he was, a man of immense power in a perfect suit. And there I was, a cleaner in a cheap uniform, my face stained with tears, with a belly that told our whole story. The difference between us was a joke. A muscle jumped in his clenched jaw. I could see he was barely containing a storm of rage. 3 men in dark suits waited in the lobby. They saw their boss carrying a pregnant cleaning woman and did not even flinch. One moved to open the door of a black car at the curb. Another spoke Italian into his phone. The third scanned the street, his eyes missing nothing, expecting trouble. Adrian placed me in the back seat with a gentleness that surprised me. He slid in beside me, and the car pulled smoothly into the Manhattan traffic. The driver moved through the streets with unpracticed ease. I watched the city lights smear across the window, my mind struggling to catch up. For months, I had feared this exact moment, being found, being confronted, being dragged into his world, but it was not happening the way I had imagined. He was not threatening me. He was not trying to intimidate me. He just sat beside me in the dark, his gaze occasionally falling to my stomach. He looked almost as overwhelmed as I felt. We arrived at a building in Tribeca that radiated wealth. It was a renovated warehouse with massive windows and a doorman who treated Adrian with the reverence reserved for an owner. He probably was. The penthouse inside was exactly what you would expect. It was modern, vast, and filled with art that cost more than a house. The view of the city was stunning, but I was in no condition to appreciate it. He led me to a leather couch that swallowed me whole, then went into the kitchen. I heard a cabinet open, water running. He returned with a glass. Drink, he said. It was almost an order. You cried too much. You are dehydrated. I took the water. He was right, and I had no energy left to argue with him. He sat in an armchair across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. We just stared at each other for a long moment. I could see the fatigue etched on his face now. He had dark circles under his eyes, just like me. His expensive clothes could not hide the tension in his shoulders or the deep weariness in his gaze. Start at the beginning, he said. Tell me everything. And I did. I told him about the positive test, the wave of panic, the impossible choices. I described changing apartments, changing my phone number, dropping out of school. I told him about the lonely clinic visits, the ultrasound pictures I hid in a box, and how I talked to our baby when the nights were too long. I told him about selling my things for prenatal vitamins, the web of lies I told my friends, and the crushing weight of being completely alone. Finally, I told him about the phone call from tonight, about losing my apartment, about feeling my entire world crumble. He listened the whole time without saying a word. His expression grew darker with every sentence. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. His hands were clasped so tightly, his knuckles were bone white. "You should have told me," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could barely control. "The second you knew, you should have found me." "I was afraid of you," I said. It was the simple truth. I was afraid of who you are, what you do, and what you might do to me. Everything I read about you painted a picture of a dangerous man. I did not know if I was just a woman you had already forgotten. "You were never random," he cut in, his eyes locked on mine. "That night was the first time in years I felt like a person, not a reputation, not a weapon to be feared. You spoke to me like I was just a man. Do you understand how rare that is for me?" I could only shake my head, afraid to speak. His raw honesty was tearing down the walls I had spent months building. He shot to his feet and began to pace the floor. "I understand your fear. I know what they say about me. Most of it is true. I have done things that would make you sick. I have made choices, that haunt me. My world is built on violence and fear." He stopped and faced me. "But I would never hurt you. I would never hurt a child, especially not my own child." "How could I have known that?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You are the father of my baby, but you are a stranger to me. I could not take that risk." His face changed, softening with a look of vulnerability. "My father," he said quietly, "was a monster. He used his fists on my mother. He used them on us." I watched her make excuses for her black eyes and broken bones until she was just a ghost. Then she got sick. Cancer. It might have been treatable, but we had no money for good doctors. He barely even visited her in the hospital. She died when I was 15. I made a promise on her grave. I would never be him. If I ever had a family, I would protect them with my life. Tears welled in my eyes again, but for a completely different reason. "I am sorry," I whispered. "I did not know." "Of course you did not," he said, his voice losing its hard edge. "We had one night, Natalie. One single, perfect night. I have thought about it 1,000 times, trying to understand why you ran. But that is the past. Now we have to decide our future." He sat down again. His stare was so intense, it stole my breath. "I will be involved. I am not just talking about money, though I will handle all of that. I want to be here for the pregnancy. I want to be in our child's life. I want—" He paused, searching for the words. "I want to try to be with you. Not just because of the baby, but because I have not stopped thinking about you since that night. When I heard your voice tonight, my first thought was not about a child. It was that I had finally found you, and I would not let you go again." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Adrian, I cannot live in your world. The danger, the things you do. I will change," he said instantly. "Not my core, but the parts that would put you in danger. I have been wanting to step back from some things anyway. I have people I can trust, and I have the resources to keep you safe. I can build a wall around you and our child that no one can ever break through." "That is not a normal life," I said, a bitter laugh escaping me. "We stopped being normal when you became pregnant with a Caruso heir," he stated bluntly. "Like it or not, our child makes you a target. My enemies will see you as a weakness. They will see you as a way to hurt me. The only way you will ever be safe is with my complete protection. The only way is to make it known that anyone who touches you is declaring war on me." The weight of his words crushed me. I had been so busy hiding from him, I never thought but about the other dangers. Dangers from people I had never even met. "This is crazy," I whispered. "I just wanted a simple life. College, a small business, a normal family." He told me my old life was not completely gone. I could still have it, just with bodyguards. and a much better apartment. He reached for me slowly, giving me a chance to back away. When I stayed still, he laid his hand on my stomach. The baby kicked right away, a clear response to his touch. I saw his face change, filled with a sudden wonder. The days after that were a whirlwind. Adrienne did not ask for my opinion. He simply told me the decisions he had made. A part of me hated his control, but I was too tired to argue. In just one day, he moved my things from my small apartment to a secure building he called a safe house. It was a 3-bedroom home with constant security. The kitchen alone was bigger than my old apartment. The windows looked out over Central Park, a view that cost more each month than I used to make in a year. He did not move in, which was a surprise. I soon understood he was giving me room to breathe, trying not to overwhelm me, but he was always there. He came in the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. He brought food from famous restaurants and prenatal vitamins from a special pharmacy. He also brought books on pregnancy that he had clearly spent time choosing. He went with me to every doctor appointment. He sat beside me, so intense that Dr. Chen noticed, but said nothing. He held my hand when we heard the heartbeat. His face was impossible to read when he saw the ultrasound of our healthy, growing baby. My life changed so fast it felt strange and uncomfortable. I suddenly had everything I had needed for months. Good food, enough rest, and proper medical care were no longer impossible choices. But taking it all felt like giving up my independence. Adrienne made me quit both of my jobs. I told him I needed to work, that I could not just take his money. He looked at me as if I were being foolish. He said carrying his child was my only job now. He reminded me I should have been resting, not cleaning buildings while pregnant. He put a large amount of money into a new bank account under my name. The number on the statement made me gasp. I tried to set limits on his financial help, but he would not listen. His tone made it clear there would be no argument. He said I was carrying his heir. His voice left no room for debate. He told me everything I needed was his duty to provide. Every comfort, every medical bill, every expense for the baby was his responsibility. He called it a privilege. He told me not to insult him by pretending I did not need his help, but it was more than the money. I was unsettled by how Adrienne acted around me. He was genuinely trying to be a better man than I expected. He was still intense and powerful, a man used to getting his way. But with me, he was careful. It was like he was holding himself back. He would stop himself from doing things that might scare me. He always asked before he touched my stomach, even when I saw how much he wanted to feel the baby kick. He listened to my fears without trying to solve everything instantly. He learned what I liked to eat and read through trial and error. His focus was both touching and a little overwhelming. We talked more than I ever thought we would. He told me about his family, about the pressure and violence that made him who he is. He spoke of his mother with love and his father with fear. He was honest about his business, which sometimes made me uneasy. He did not make it sound glamorous or hide what it was. He never apologized for the choices he made to survive in his world. That world had very different rules than mine. Slowly, he started to share his plan for the future. He wanted to step back from the most dangerous parts of his work. He planned to focus on legal businesses that would not put his family in danger. He told me one night that he had been thinking about this for a long time. The violence and the constant threat from rivals was exhausting. He said it could not last forever. He had loyal men who could run things. They had earned more responsibility. He could still oversee everything without being on the front lines, where he could be killed or arrested. I asked him if he could truly get away from that life. He explained that he was not walking away completely. He would always have his connections and influence. Some of his business would always be in a gray area. But there was a difference between making every call himself and managing from a distance. He said his child deserved a father who was present. He wanted to be a father who was not always looking over his shoulder. I wanted to believe him. But I knew that leaving the world of organized crime was not that simple. Enemies do not just forget you exist. I asked him about the people who might see our baby as a target. I voiced the fear that had been growing inside me. You said your enemies would come after us. How does stepping back change that? His face grew hard. He said it did not change everything. That is why I would have security every time I left the apartment. That is why the baby would be protected from birth. And that is why he was eliminating his biggest rivals right now. He leaned toward me, his eyes burning with intensity. I know this is not the life you planned, Natalie, but I can keep you safe. I can keep both of you safe. That is a promise I will back up with everything I have. His confidence should have made me feel better. Instead, it showed me just how far my life had spun out of control. I thought about the girl I was 6 months ago. She was just trying to finish college and build a simple, stable life. That girl felt like a stranger now. She had no idea how fast a life could shatter. I am scared, I admitted in a quiet voice. I am scared of this world and what it means for our child. He told me I was already surviving it. You have been doing it for months, all alone, with nothing. You are much stronger than you believe, Natalie. You just have to let someone else help you carry the weight. In the weeks that followed, I started to think this new life might work. Adriani was there every single day. His consistency slowly broke down my walls. He learned which foods made me sick and brought different options. When I was tired, he made me rest, sometimes leading me to bed and waiting until I was asleep. He was always asking about the baby. He wanted to know about names, how to decorate the nursery, and if I wanted to know the sex before the birth. His excitement seemed real, not forced. But there were always reminders of who he was. One afternoon, I heard him on the phone, speaking Italian. His voice was cold and hard, a tone he never used with me. He was clearly giving orders that made someone on the other end panic. Another night, he came home with bruised knuckles and a cut on his face. He called it business and refused to say more. Then there were the bodyguards, silent men and women who followed me everywhere I went. Their eyes were always scanning for trouble. According to Dr. Chen, the pregnancy was going well. My blood pressure was a little high from stress, but the baby was healthy and active. I had finally agreed to find out the sex at our next appointment, mostly because Adrian was so excited to know. He asked me at least a dozen times, his excitement obvious. He was sure it was a boy, and spoke of teaching him, protecting him, and giving him the childhood he never had. The tenderness in his voice made my chest ache with feelings I was not ready to explore. We had not defined our relationship beyond being two people having a child. He never tried to kiss me or touch me, except for the careful way he placed his hands on my stomach to feel the baby kick. I did not know if he was giving me space or if he no longer saw me that way. I was afraid to ask, unsure which answer I truly wanted. Then everything changed on a cold November night. I was 6 months pregnant, and we had found a delicate balance that seemed like it might actually last. Adrian had left that afternoon for what he called an important meeting. He promised to return for dinner and asked what I wanted him to bring home. I was in the living room, reading, talking quietly to our baby about nothing important. Suddenly I heard shouting in the hallway outside our apartment. Then I heard gunshots. A deep cold filled me with terror. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone to call Adrian, but it went straight to voicemail. The security guard, Maria, burst through the door. She had always been professional and calm. She said we needed to move right now. Her voice was urgent. There was a security breach in the building. She told me the protocol was to move me to the safe room. I barely remember what happened next. Maria practically carried me to what looked like a closet. It was actually a reinforced panic room with its own air and communication systems. She yelled orders into her radio as she sealed the heavy door. I sat on the floor, my arms wrapped around my belly. I listened to muffled noises from outside, not knowing if they were more gunshots or just my imagination. The baby was moving wildly, reacting to my fear. I tried to breathe slowly and stay calm like I learned in my online classes, but the terror made it impossible. It felt like hours passed, but it was probably only 40 minutes. The door opened, and Adrian stood there, his face a mask of fear and rage. His shirt was stained with blood. I could not tell if it was his or someone else's. His normally perfect hair was a mess. In 2 quick steps, he crossed the room and pulled me up from the floor. He held me so tightly I could barely breathe, his hands shaking as he checked me for injuries. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, almost unrecognizable. "Did anyone touch you? Is the baby okay?" "We are fine," I managed to say, my body trembling. "What happened? What was all that?" His expression became pure murder. "Rivals," he said sharply. "The Moretti family. They tried to send a message by coming after you. They did not get close. Maria and the team did their jobs, but they tried, and that is enough." He was still holding me, and I could feel the tension running through his body. "I am ending this tonight. They wanted a war, so they will get one, but not the one they expect, Adrian. No," I started to say, but he stopped me with a look that was entirely predatory. "This is not a discussion," he said, his voice like steel. "They came after my child, my family. There are lines you do not cross in this world. They crossed the most important one. I gave them chances to back down, to respect boundaries. They refused. So now I will answer in the only way they understand." I knew I could not argue with him like this, and a part of me did not want to. They had tried to hurt me and my baby. A primal instinct inside me wanted them to pay. "What are you going to do?" I asked in a quiet voice. "What I should have done months ago," he answered. "I am going to eliminate the threat. I will remove the people who run the Moretti family. I will dismantle their entire operation. It will make it clear to every other family that you are not to be touched." He pulled back a little, holding my face in his hands. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" I nodded, not fully understanding what I was agreeing to. He kissed my forehead, a gentle touch that was a sharp contrast to the violence inside him. Then he gave Maria detailed instructions about new security plans that I barely understood. He promised he would be back as soon as he could. He told me to stay in the apartment. He said that after tonight, everything would be different. Then he left. I was alone with my fear, my racing thoughts, and a baby who would not stop kicking. Maria tried to make me eat and rest, but I could not. I walked around the apartment for hours, imagining the worst. I wondered what "eliminate the threat" really meant. I was terrified Adrian would not come back, or that he would return as a different man. The baby grew more agitated as the night continued, feeding on my stress, which only made me feel helpless. It was nearly dawn when Adrian came back. He looked exhausted and grim, but he was not hurt. He found me in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair, staring at the empty crib. He did not speak at first. He just pulled me to my feet and held me. I could feel he was still incredibly tense beneath his exhaustion. "Is it over?" I asked into his chest. "It is over," he said. "The Moretti leaders are gone. Their businesses are broken apart. Their territory is gone. The other families know that you and the baby are under my complete protection. Anyone who threatens you will face the same fate. You are safe now, Natalie. I promise." I wanted to ask what he had done. I wanted to know who had died, and if I should be horrified or relieved. But I looked at his face and saw the weight of the last few hours in his eyes. I could not bring myself to ask. I just nodded and let him lead me to our bed. He held me as I finally fell asleep from exhaustion. The weeks that followed were tense. Adrian was different. He was harder in some ways, but also more committed to being the father he promised he would be. He sped up his plans to step back from his daily operations. He promoted people he trusted to manage the business. He started spending much more time with me. He came to every doctor appointment and was there for every milestone. He read pregnancy books with a serious focus that was both funny and touching. He asked Dr. Chen so many questions she started scheduling longer visits for us. We still had not talked about what we were, but the attack had changed something. We were closer, brought together by the danger we had survived. The baby connected us more than words ever could. He still did not seek physical intimacy beyond holding me for comfort or placing his hands on my stomach. But the tenderness in his eyes made my heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. My labor started 3 weeks early, on a snowy day in January. Adrian was meeting with his lawyers about transferring business assets. My water broke while I was in the nursery, and everything turned to chaos. Maria called for backup. Adrian was there in minutes, looking terrified, but trying to stay calm. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Then came hours of labor. It was the most painful and amazing experience of my life. Adrian held my hand through every single contraction. He whispered encouragement to me in both English and Italian. He looked at me as if I were performing a miracle. The attack happened during the final stage of labor. I was in too much pain to understand what was going on. I heard shouting, then saw Adrian pull out a gun. He stood between me and the door with a look that promised death to anyone who entered. Maria and the security team locked down the delivery room. Hospital security handled the threat. It was a final, desperate attack from what was left of the Moretti family. It was over in minutes, neutralized before they got close, but it confirmed a hard truth. Our child was being born into violence. The only way to keep them safe was to fully accept Adrian's world. And then, after all the pain and fear, our son was born. Adrienne's hands trembled when he cut the umbilical cord. The doctor handed our baby to him, and I saw this deadly, powerful man completely shatter. He held our son and sobbed, murmuring promises in Italian that I felt more than understood. The raw emotion in his eyes made me start crying too. "I will protect you," he promised. I knew he was talking about both of us, the two of you. "I will do whatever it takes. I will change however I must. Natalie, you are my family now. Nothing else matters." I reached out and touched his face. This man was my terror and my comfort all at once. The words I had held back for weeks finally came out. "I love you. I do not know how or when it happened. It may be a foolish mistake, but I love you." His expression shifted into a mix of wonder, relief, and resolve. "I fell in love with you on that first night," he confessed, "and I have been falling deeper ever since. I understand my world is violent and not what you wanted, but I swear I will spend my life making sure you never regret this." He finally kissed me, with our son between us. Outside, security teams stood guard. Nothing about our life would ever be simple, but as I looked at our perfect little baby, I thought that maybe normal was not so important. What we had was harder and scarier, demanding more courage than I knew I had, but it was more real than any fairy tale I had ever dreamed of. In the following days, Adrian kept his word. He withdrew from his most dangerous work. He rebuilt his entire organization to make our family's safety the top priority. He started the slow journey of moving toward legitimate businesses that would not endanger our son. The change was not total. He was still the same man, with power that moved in the shadows, but the shift was real, born from loving something more than power. We moved to a house outside the city that was protected like a fortress. We created a life that balanced Adrian's work with our son's well-being and my own recovery. I began taking online courses again to finish my degree at my own pace. With his complete support, we built something that almost resembled a normal family. If you ignored the armed guards and the occasional meetings with men who lived outside the law. We named our son Marco. He grew up knowing he was fiercely loved and completely protected by both his parents. He was the heir to a complicated world that we would help him understand when he was older. I learned that love does not always appear in the way you expect. Sometimes the person who frightens you the most becomes the one you cannot live without. And I learned that real family is worth every single risk and every moment of fear. It is worth the courage it takes to choose it. I had hidden the pregnancy for months, terrified of what Adrian would do. In the end, that secret built a foundation stronger than I could have imagined. Our love was not based on perfection. It was built on choosing one another every day, despite the dangers and the impossible world we shared. The first few months of Marco's life were a strange mix of opposites. I experienced moments of pure family happiness, broken by reminders of the world we lived in. I would be feeding our son in the nursery at 3 in the morning, watching the sun rise over our secure property. I felt like any other new mother. Then I would see an armed guard patrolling outside, and I would remember that normal was never truly possible for us. Adrian was serious about protecting us, and I saw the proof of his commitment all around me. The house he chose was in Westchester. It was far enough from the city to feel quiet, but close enough for him to attend meetings when he had to. The house was beautiful, but not flashy. It was a renovated colonial with large windows that filled the rooms with light. The property was large enough that the security did not make it feel like a prison. He had asked for my opinion on every detail of the inside. He learned what I liked with the same focus he used for everything else. The result was a house that felt like my own, not just a place he owned, but the security was always there, and sometimes it felt like too much. Cameras watched every part of the grounds. Motion sensors were hidden in the surrounding woods. We had a panic room, even better than the one in his apartment. A team of guards worked around the clock. Maria was now in charge of our security. I had come to trust her completely, but sometimes I hated needing her. I wanted to take my baby for a walk without planning routes and timings with armed guards. Adrien was also dealing with his own difficult changes. I could see the stress on him, even when he tried to hide it. He kept his promise to step back from the violent side of his work. He gave authority to men he trusted and focused on legal businesses. But leaving that world was not easy. He had to manage old alliances so that no one felt abandoned. He had to constantly show that his new focus did not make him weak or easy to challenge. I would watch him take calls late at night. His voice would become cold and commanding in a way that still made me nervous. He would go to meetings that lasted for hours and come home looking exhausted. I learned not to ask about where he went or what he did. It was not that he was hiding things from me. We had agreed that I did not want to know the details that would steal my sleep. We had a quiet understanding about the line between his business and our family. The biggest surprise was how easily he became a father. The same intensity that made him a dangerous man now made him a devoted father. He was involved in every part of Marco's care, which broke every stereotype I knew. He learned to change diapers with extreme precision. He studied child development charts like they were secret reports. He would get up for nighttime feedings without a single complaint, even with important meetings the next day. I would often find him in the nursery, just watching Marco sleep with a soft look on his face. Seeing his vulnerability around our son was almost more shocking than his ruthlessness had been. He was afraid of doing something wrong, of hurting this perfect child we made. That fear made him question himself, which was something he never did. He would always ask me if he was holding Marco the right way or feeding him enough. When Marco's tiny hand wrapped around his finger, I would see this feared man completely melt. We were learning how to be partners, and it was a challenge. Our backgrounds were so different that even small choices became difficult. I wanted Marco to have a normal childhood, with friends and public parks. Adrienne's first instinct was to keep him safe and isolated with private tutors. I wanted to let our son slowly become independent. Adrienne could not stand the thought of Marco being out of his sight or beyond his protection. We argued about these things late at night when Marco was asleep. We were both passionate about doing what was best for our son. But we also learned how to meet in the middle, between my desire for a normal life and his need for security. Adrienne agreed that Marco could have experiences outside our home as long as security was in place. I admitted that some protection was needed, and he was not just being paranoid. We talked about our own childhoods. Those conversations helped us understand each other on a much deeper level. I finally understood why Adrian needed so much control. It all came from fear. He was terrified of losing us, like he lost his mother. He was afraid of failing to protect the people he loved. I knew our relationship was changing in ways that excited and scared me. We had admitted our feelings in the hospital, but building a romance while learning to be parents was difficult. We lived together and raised our son, Marco, but had not talked about getting married. We had no official commitment. Adrian gave me the master bedroom and took a guest room. He respected my need for space, but the tension between us grew every day. When he walked past me in the hall, I felt a jolt of electricity. I would see him holding our son and wish I was in his arms instead. Sometimes he looked at me with so much desire I had to turn away. We were both scared. We did not want to rush things before building a solid foundation of trust. Everything changed about 4 months after Marco was born. My doctor said I could resume my normal life, but I was still so tired. Adrian had been gone for a 2-day business trip he could not miss. He came home late on a Saturday night. I was in the living room, wide awake. He found me on the couch, pretending to read a book. The look in his eyes made my breath catch. He said he missed me. His voice was so honest that it broke something open inside me. He said it was not just Marco he missed. He told me, "Natalie, I missed talking to you. I missed your laugh. These last 2 days were torture." I put my book down. My heart was racing. "I missed you too," I said. "The house felt so empty without you." I told him how Marco seemed to search for him. I stopped, unable to explain how much I felt. He walked across the room slowly. He sat down next to me, so close I could feel his warmth. He told me he was trying to give me space. He did not want to push me, but he needed me to know his feelings were real. He said, "I am in love with you, Natalie." He loved how I was with our son. He loved my strength and my stubbornness. He said everything about me made him fall deeper in love. I touched his face and traced the line of his jaw. "I am scared," I whispered. "I am scared of these feelings, and I am scared of your world. I am afraid I will lose all of this." He told me he was scared too. The vulnerability in his eyes was almost painful. He was terrified of failing me and keeping me safe. He feared I would wake up one day and realize I had made a mistake. But he was more scared of not trying. He could not pretend we were just co-parenting anymore. So, I kissed him. The distance we had kept for months was finally gone. It felt like coming home and stepping off a cliff. He kissed me back with a passion he had been holding back for a long time. His hands held my face, and his kiss left me breathless. But we did not sleep together that night. We knew Marco was upstairs. We wanted to take things slow. We stayed on that couch, talking until the sun came up. We made promises about the future we would build. He asked me to marry him, not for the baby, but because he loved me and wanted to spend his life with me. I said yes. I knew it meant accepting his dangerous world because a life without him was not an option. We kept the engagement private at first. Adrian gave me a beautiful ring with a single perfect diamond. We planned a small summer wedding in our garden where we could manage security and feel safe. Planning a wedding with a new baby while Adrian managed his business was chaotic. Sometimes I just wanted to elope with Maria and one of his men as witnesses. But Adrian wanted it to be special. He wanted our son to see us make our commitment. His determination was sweet, but sometimes overwhelming. The dangers did not disappear. His enemies realized direct attacks would not work, so they tried other ways to hurt us. They tried to get security information. They looked for weaknesses in his new businesses and tried to ruin his reputation. Adrian handled every threat with his usual cold focus. But I saw the stress it caused him. He constantly worried if he was doing enough to keep us safe. Some nights I would wake up in a panic, but Adrian was always already awake, his weapon nearby. I still hated the restrictions on our lives. I just wanted to take Marco to a park without guards and escape plans. My life felt unreal. I went from hiding my pregnancy to starting a family with a very dangerous man. But there were moments of pure happiness that made it all worth it. I loved watching Adrian teach Marco to make funny faces. I loved finding the small love notes he hid for me around the house. I loved our quiet nights together, after Marco was asleep, just talking and building a deeper connection. I finished my degree that spring, studying online while Marco napped. Graduating was one of my proudest moments. The ceremony had heavy security, which probably worried the university. But having Adrian and Marco there meant everything. It was proof that I had not lost myself. I was still me, not just a mother or a partner. Adrian kept his promise to move toward legitimate business, but legitimate in his world was often a moral gray area. He invested in real estate and technology. He kept his old connections but at a distance, acting as an advisor instead of a commander. It was not a clean break. That was probably impossible, but it was a real change made for our family. We were married on a perfect day in June, in our garden. Marco was 8 months old and served as our ring bearer with Maria's help. We had fewer than 30 guests. I wore a simple, white dress. He wore a perfectly tailored suit. We wrote our own vows. When Adrian promised to protect and choose me every day, his voice broke with emotion, and many of our guests cried. When the guests were gone and Marco was finally asleep, the house grew still. We were alone at last, truly husband and wife. This was nothing like our first time together. It was measured and meaningful. Holding all the history and devotion we had built, Adrian was gentle and intense, completely there with me. Afterward, I rested in his arms in our master bedroom. A sense of peace filled me that I had never known before. This was my new life, my family. It was complicated and dangerous, and not the future I had imagined for myself. But it was mine in a way that mattered more than any fantasy. I had spent months hiding from Adrian, terrified of what he would do if he found out about the pregnancy. Yet being found was the best thing that ever happened. It was not his money or his protection that saved me. It was building a family with him that taught me love does not always show up in a safe and simple way. It can arrive wrapped in danger, forcing choices that fill you with fear. You have to be courageous enough to take it. The person you once feared most can become the one you trust completely. Hiding from what is true only buys you time. It cannot stop love from finding you when you need it most, even when you are too scared to recognize it. This story teaches us that strength is not about hiding from what scares you. It is about facing it, even when your hands are shaking. Natalie could have stayed hidden forever. She could have raised her child alone and never looked back. But she chose to trust, to love, and to build something real with the one person the world told her to fear. It reminds us that our greatest fear and our greatest love can sometimes be the very same person, and that the bravest thing we can ever do is stop running. If this story moved you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. We would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever hidden something important because you were afraid of what would happen if the truth came out? What gave you the strength to finally face it? Share your story in the comments, because every experience matters, and we read every single one. Thank you for being here with us. We wish you and everyone you love strength, peace, and a love that is worth the risk. See you in the next video. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaningful stories and valuable life lessons.